On the Hollywood Walk of Fame, workers put up a star for Elizabeth Sparkle to celebrate her success. Over time, the star gets cracks from the changing weather and all the people who walk over it every day. Right now, Elizabeth is filming her morning aerobics show, Sparkle Your Life. After the shoot, she walks down a long hallway where some staff wish her a happy 50th birthday. Since the women's restroom is out of order, she decides to use the men's room because it's empty. After she goes into a stall, the show's producer, Harvey, comes in and starts using the urinal while talking on the phone. Elizabeth hears him say they need to replace her with someone younger and prettier as soon as possible. After Harvey leaves, she steps out of the stall, trying to understand what she just heard. Later, Harvey invites Elizabeth to lunch to share some bad news. He tells her that viewers want something fresh, hinting that she might be too old to keep hosting the show. To escape the awkwardness, he steps away to talk to someone else, leaving Elizabeth in shock as she watches a fly struggling in her drink. That afternoon, Elizabeth drives on the highway. She gets distracted when she sees workers taking down her billboard. Suddenly, another car crashes into hers at an intersection, causing a big accident. At the hospital, the doctor tells her she's lucky to be unharmed, but when he wishes her a happy birthday after looking at her chart, she starts to cry. A moment later, the doctor gets an urgent message and leaves the room. As Elizabeth tries to get dressed, a male nurse stops her to say he needs to do one last check. He pinches the skin on her back, runs his finger down her spine, and tells her she would be a good candidate for something, leaving her confused. Before he goes, he hands her a yellow coat and she notices a birthmark on his wrist. Outside the hospital, Elizabeth checks her pockets and finds a flash drive labeled The Substance, along with a note from the nurse saying it changed his life. Just then, Fred, someone she went to high school with, approaches her. He writes down his number and hopes they can grab a drink sometime. Later, in her apartment, Elizabeth plugs the flash drive into her TV, and a video starts playing. A voice asks if she has ever dreamed of a better version of herself. It explains that one injection of the substance can unlock her DNA and create another version of her. The video says she is the Matrix, meaning everything in the world is connected to her. It stresses that both versions of her must maintain a balance of 7 days each and that they are one and the same. After the video ends, Elizabeth throws the flash drive in the trash. That night, she drinks alone at a bar and realizes that men her age don't see her as attractive anymore. Back home, she gets sick in the bathroom and looks at her tear-stained face in the mirror. Frustrated, she picks up a snow globe and angrily throws it at her large portrait, covering it in glitter. Later, she digs the flash drive out of the trash and calls the number she found. She asks to place an order, but all she gets is an address. The next day, still hungover, Elizabeth sees a casting call in the newspaper looking for young, lively women to replace her as the next Elizabeth Sparkle. While checking her mail, she finds a mysterious package with a keycard labeled 503 inside. Soon, she goes to the address and uses the card to open a rolling door. At the end of the hallway, she enters a white room and takes the box from her assigned locker. Once in her apartment, Elizabeth opens the package and discovers a bag labeled Activator, with a warning that says it's a single-use serum that must be thrown away after use. Next, she finds a stabilizer meant for her other self and a switch, which are 2 intravenous lines with cannulas on both ends. Lastly, there are 2 bags of food matrix, each good for 7 days. At the bottom of the box, she sees instruction cards stating that she must activate once, stabilize daily, switch every 7 days without fail, and always remember they are one. In the bathroom, Elizabeth prepares the syringe with the activator, leaving some in the bottle. She ties a tourniquet around her arm and injects the serum. Sharp pain hits her, causing her to collapse. As she writhes, a blue eye emerges next to her green one, and a knee pushes through a cut on her back. Her other self admires her youthful appearance in the mirror, noticing the activator glowing in her iris. Seeing Elizabeth's body makes her feel sick, and she throws up a yellow liquid. She uses sutures to close the incision on Elizabeth's back and inserts a food matrix cannula for nutrition. The next day, the other self hears ringing and blood drips from her nose. She extracts stabilizer fluid from Elizabeth's spine and injects it into her thigh. Later, While stretching, she sees a casting call ad in the newspaper and spots a shiny pink bodysuit in a store window. At the audition, she wears the bodysuit and introduces herself as Sue. The casting director, Harvey, is impressed and agrees to work around her schedule since she needs time off for her sick mother. Days later, after a successful photo shoot, a billboard announces her new show. As the week ends, she connects the switch cannulas to their arms. Blood flows through the tubes, transferring consciousness. Seconds later, Elizabeth wakes up with the other self unconscious on top of her. After showering, Elizabeth returns to the studio, where Harvey hands her a box of belongings and a gift from the staff. In her apartment, Elizabeth marks a calendar for her and Sue's switching schedule. The next day, she finds a note that her refill kit is in her locker and stores the items in the medicine cabinet. After the switch, Sue notices an indentation on the chair and realizes Elizabeth has been indoors all week. To hide Elizabeth's body, she starts knocking down a wall to create a secret room. The noise attracts her neighbor, Oliver, who shifts from annoyance to flirting when he sees Sue. She lies, saying Elizabeth moved out and she's the new tenant. Later, Sue hides Elizabeth behind a tile wall in the bathroom and removes Elizabeth's portrait from the living room. Soon after, she films the first episode of her show, Pumpernickel, becoming its first female host. The pleased producer praises her performance. That night, Sue puts on a tight bodysuit and notices her food matrix supply is low. She chooses to party with friends instead of switching. Later, she returns home with Troy. As they get close, Sue hears ringing and has a nosebleed, stumbling to the secret room to find Elizabeth struggling with an empty food matrix bag. Instead of switching, Sue extracts stabilizer from Elizabeth to buy time. Afterward, when Troy unzips the bodysuit, her insides spill out. Elizabeth wakes up and realizes it was just a nightmare, but notices her index finger has aged quickly. Feeling tenderness at her extraction site and seeing the empty canister, Elizabeth understands they didn't switch on time. She calls a hotline for help, but learns that what's lost on one side can't be recovered. The voice reminds her they are one and must keep the balance. After the call, Elizabeth throws Troy's motorcycle helmet into the hallway and begins cleaning the apartment. That afternoon, Elizabeth picks up her refill kit and stops at a diner. An old man at another table mentions how long 7 days feels. She recognizes him as the male nurse from the hospital, and he shares that switching gets lonelier each time. Uneasy, Elizabeth stands to leave, but he asks if her other self is eating away at her. Outside, she encounters Troy, who treats her disrespectfully, unlike Sue. Back in her apartment, Elizabeth searches for Fred's number and invites him for a drink. That evening, she puts on a red dress and gloves to hide her aged finger, then applies her makeup. As she closes the secret room door, she catches a glimpse of Sue's youthful face. In the living room, she notices a large billboard outside and goes to the bathroom to adjust her makeup. Seeing her reflection in the doorknob, she feels anger and self-hate, wiping off her lipstick and ruining her makeup. Later, she receives messages from Fred asking why she's not at the restaurant. While filming, she feels a lump on her backside, heads to the dressing room and pulls out a chicken leg from her belly button. Suddenly, Elizabeth wakes up in the secret room, realizing it was just a nightmare. In the living room, she sees a plate of bones and realizes she must have eaten a whole roast chicken. That afternoon, Sue calls the hotline, frustrated that the balance isn't working because Elizabeth has spent the week binge-watching TV. Later, Harvey informs Elizabeth that she's set to host a big New Year's Eve show, which thrills her. Ignoring the switching schedule, Sue extracts stabilizer daily. Weeks later, Elizabeth wakes up horrified to find half her body has aged decades. She calls the hotline, expressing that Sue doesn't respect the balance. Although offered help to return to her old self, she decides to make it work. That night, Elizabeth struggles to walk and finds a French cookbook in a gift. As Sue's interview plays on TV, Elizabeth angrily mocks her and claims she's the reason for Sue's youthful look. In frustration, she throws raw eggs at the window, covering it with newspaper to block the billboard. After the switch, Sue is disgusted by the apartment's state. Determined to keep her new body, she fills jars with stabilizer and ignores her bruised extraction site, repeatedly using the needle. 3 days later, on December 30th, Sue admires the billboard for the New Year's Eve show. She heads to the secret room for stabilizer, only to find the fluid is dark brown, indicating it has run out. Panicking, Sue calls the hotline, but the only advice she gets is to switch so the original body can recover. With no other choice, she crawls to the bathroom to start the switch. Hearing a noise from the bedroom, Diego asks if everything is okay. To her shock, she sees that she has turned into a hairless, twisted hunchback. Angry, she tells her boyfriend to leave, and he quickly exits the apartment. Moments later, Elizabeth calls the hotline, wanting to end the experience. The next day, Elizabeth gets a note saying her final kit has arrived. She retrieves it and heads straight back to the apartment. In the living room, Elizabeth injects the termination serum into Sue's chest. But since they share the same consciousness, she realizes she still wants the attention that comes with being Sue. Just before giving the full dose, she hesitates. Understanding she still needs Sue, she connects the switching tubes to their wrists. When the blood doesn't flow, she stabs the cannula into Sue's chest. This unexpected move causes both of them to be fully aware at the same time. With the termination syringe on the floor, Sue realizes what has happened and becomes furious, attacking Elizabeth. In the bathroom, she slams Elizabeth into the mirror repeatedly, disfiguring her face. Injured, Elizabeth crawls back to the living room, where Sue kicks her body until she stops moving. Suddenly, Sue remembers they are one and feels horrified by her actions. A few hours before the show, Sue puts on her blue ball gown, but suddenly hears ringing and starts coughing. She rushes to the bathroom, shocked to lose a tooth, and easily pull out 2 more. After rinsing her mouth, she remembers the leftover activation serum at home. In the hallway, Harvey and the shareholders approach, and Sue forces a smile to hide her missing teeth. After a tense chat, she steps into the elevator, where she notices a fingernail and an ear fall off. Back at her apartment, Sue injects the activation serum, hoping to create a better version of herself. The serum transforms her into a monstrous hybrid, Monstro Elisa Sue, with Elizabeth's face protruding from her back. Determined to reach the show, Elisa Sue puts on the gown, inserts earrings into her skin, and makes a mask from Elizabeth's portrait. She walks to the studio, imagining cheers from the network staff. As the New Year's Eve show begins, she stumbles into the spotlight, her strange voice confusing the crowd. Suddenly, the mask slips off, the audience screams, calling her a monster, and chaos erupts. Despite her insistence that she's still Elizabeth, one man strikes her down with a microphone. In shock, the creature grows another head. When her arm breaks off, it sprays the crowd. She eventually escapes to the streets, but collapses into a messy pile. Elizabeth's face crawls out, covered in liquid, and as she looks at the stars, she recalls how much she was adored. After a brief moment of happiness, the mask dissolves into a puddle. The next day, a floor scrubber cleans up the remnants of the fallen celebrity, leaving only her star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame as a reminder of her legacy.
Thanks for tuning in. Don't forget to subscribe, hit the bell icon, and stay connected with us.